Okay, so yesterday Miss Vala introduced you to rotations. And we're going to take that a little bit further today in some practice with pages 13, 14, and 15. So on page 13, we'll get the date up there. And we're going to make a couple of changes on this as we go, just to make it easier, and also there's a couple of mistakes, but we'll get to that. First things first. If you're going to perform a rotation, there are three methods, and I think Ms. Vala talked about two of them. I'll add another one in today. First method, and she showed you in yesterday's notes, we're learning the rules, meaning, x, y becomes y negative x, all the rules that were in the notes yesterday. You could theoretically memorize those or look them up every time and follow a rule for what happens when you rotate 90, 180, 270, positive, negative, anything like that. That's one way of doing it. And if you like that method, you can look at yesterday's video and look at the rules for that. Another way would be to use patty paper. And if you're in-person student, you've probably seen me pass it out at some point a couple of weeks ago introducing it. All it really is tracing paper. The little tiny squares of tracing paper. Sometimes we use, you could in a pinch use a tissue as long as you can see through it. You could even just use a white piece of paper that isn't too thick because you can see the black writing on the paper below it, even if you held it up to a window or something. So you could use anything, wax paper, anything that you can see through. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And the third way is literally just to turn your paper. This is sort of like patty paper without using the patty paper. You're just going to imagine it had it been rotated, and we're going to show that method as well. So there are three ways to do this. Okay, first things first, for some reason there's a word reflection right here. Cross that out. This is all about rotations. That should not say reflection. And we're also going to make another change here. Capital R is rotation. But what we're going to do is change this to the origin, 90 degrees. Ms. Vala talked about the notation yesterday, but we're not going to have E be the center of rotation. We're going to focus on just the origin being the center of rotation. So I won't do all three methods for every single problem on here, but in this one I certainly will since it's the first one. So I recopied D, E, and F here. The points that they gave me. I've also plotted them appropriately on the graph. And if you remember from yesterday, the rule for rotating 90 was negative yx. So basically that means you're taking the second coordinate and switching it with the first coordinate, but then making the first coordinate the opposite sign. So for example, this first one, if I had 0, 4, well, first it's going to switch positions because x and y switched, so it'll be 4, 0, but then the second coordinate, which is now the first coordinate, has to change signs. So 3, 4, I'm going to switch positions, but then make the old second coordinate, which is now the first coordinate, negative. And obviously 0, 0, nothing happens. Zeros are easy. So that's one way you could do it. Another way, and you could plot those and see the answer, but I want to wait to show you the other method here. The other way, or another way, is to put your tracing paper down. So I'm going to pretend to put tracing paper down. Let's say you had a piece of tracing paper. I'm going to put it right over my sheet. I'm going to trace the triangle underneath it, making sure I have all the points. And then at the origin, I'm going to put a little plus sign. Remember Ms. Vala showing you this yesterday? Not really a plus sign, but it's more of just like a crosshairs where the x and y axis meet. And then take your pen or pencil and kind of pin it down, push it down right here in the center. And then with your other hand, take the patty paper and rotate it 90 degrees right on the origin. And you can see those new points after rotating it 90 degrees end up exactly where our rules brought us. So that's method number 2. Method number 3 would be to just turn your paper. So see how I wrote top up here before? Because that's obviously the top right now. But if I'm going to rotate 90 degrees clockwise, which is this way, that means that this will now be the top. The top becomes over there. So if you literally just turn your paper so that that is the top, and then replot as if that's up, that's down, that's left, and that's right. If you treat this like the top, and then replot those original points, 0, 4, 3, 4, and 0, 0, you end up. Now when you turn your paper back the other way, you've simulated a different top, so you can also rotate that way. So there are 3 different ways you could rotate. So you can see D prime was -4, 0, E prime was -4, 3, and F prime stayed at 0, 0. Whether you did it this way or whether you used the rules. Okay, for question B, we're going to make the same change we made before. We're going to change this to rotate from the origin 90 degrees. We're not going to mess with anything that's not the origin yet. So now you have a choice. You can use your rules. So you could take point A, point B, and point C, and follow those rules, which means switch the X and Y axis, or the X and Y coordinates, sorry, and then make the second coordinate, which is now the first coordinate, the opposite sign. So if I made this 6, 3, right, or 6, -3, sorry, I just switched them, right? But then I made that one the opposite sign. If I switch these, this one's a little confusing because they're both 1s, but if I switch them, first I get 1, -1, but then I make that coordinate the opposite sign. If I switch these, then make the first coordinate negative, and you end up with that. So if you like the rules method, that's one way of doing it. If you like the patty paper method, remember you're going to just take your tissue or wax paper or tracing paper or even a thin sheet of white paper, and you're going to put it right over the top of your sheet after you've plotted the shape, obviously. And then you're going to trace right over it, making sure that you have obvious points where the vertexes are. And then this says 90 degrees as well. So 90 degrees, you're going to take your patty paper, you're going to turn it that way, but not before you put your little crosshairs on the origin, because that lets you know where 90 degrees is once that clicks back the same way. So let's take this, we'll rotate it 90 degrees, and you should see that you end up with those 3 points being right where the rules told you they should be. So that's method number 2. And then method number 3 would be, instead of treating that like the top, we're going to rotate it 90, so that's the top, and then I'll just replot these points as if that is up. So -3 would be this way and 6 would be that way. So -3, 6, -1, 1, and -5, 1. Treating that as it's the top. So there's 3 different methods. You get to pick whichever one you like. On page 14 now, there's 2 more problems, and that's as far as we'll go. But again, right away, let's fix this and cross off the word reflection on that one, And we're also going to rewrite this, rotate about the origin 180 degrees, not the point 0, negative 3. I want to make sure that change was made. And then on the bottom one here, before we forget, we're going to make the same change. We're going to rotate about the origin, this time 270 degrees. Okay. So you pick what method you like. Are you going to use the rules, which you can look at above? Are you going to use some sort of tracing paper that you might have, wax paper, white paper? Or are you just going to turn your paper and pretend that the top is now in a different place? So I'll do one more with you, and then the fourth one you'll do on your own. This is different because it's 180 degrees, which is sometimes easier because you're basically turning it completely around the opposite way, 180. And the rules for 180 are different than the rules for 90. The rules for 180 are you just change the sign of both coordinates. Whatever the signs were, you switch them. Doesn't mean that they're always negative. It just means whatever they were, change them. So in this case, if D was 0, 4, and E was 3, 4, and F was 0, 0, there's not much to change with all those zeros, but that means they would come out and they would look like, well, 0 can't change, but that one can. Change, change, and then 0 can't change. So it seems easy. The difference is you'd have to know or realize that every time you have a 90, a 180, a 270, they're all different rules. So that's method number 1. Method number 2 would be to take your patty paper, put it right over the picture, trace it, making sure you have the points, and then of course putting your little plus sign at the crosshairs of the Y and the x-axis. But this time it's 180, remember, so we're taking it and we're turning it totally around. But remember, I can't do this as well with the iPad as you can with actual tracing paper or a pencil. You really need to pin down right in the middle there. Push with your pencil so it doesn't shift around. So it stays right in the middle the whole time. And then once you get it all the way around, you end up with those same points. Method number 3 would be to change where the top is. Now remember, if that's the top, but this time it's 180, right? It's not here, it's here. So now that's the top. So essentially it's completely upside down. Turn your paper totally upside down and replot those 3 points, and you end up with those points. And your final answer will look like that. So now you're going to try D. Just remember, 270 is even different. 270 is 3 turns. So if you're going to use the rules, the rule here is y negative x, which means you switch the coordinates, but then you make the second one, the original x, which is now the second one, you change that sign. So that's the rule for 270s. To see if you're using rules, you have to know each rule is different. Now, if you're using tracing paper, you know what to do. Except this time it's 270, so you're going to go, once you make your crosshairs, you're going 3 clicks to the left, right? Because it's 270 degrees. Or if you're using method number 3, instead of this being the top, that's 90, that's 180, that's 270 is over there. So that's the new top, and then you would plot those 3. So give it a shot. A prime, B prime, C prime.